In this module, I want to talk about an experience I had with case study learning for how to buy better and how to sell better, because I thought it was one thing for us to intellectually understand what total procurement cost was, and it was another thing for our buyers to actually buy lower total procurement costs on a win-win cooperative basis with suppliers, and it was another thing for our salespeople to actually go out and sell TPC either on a transactional basis or eventually a win-win routinization kind of basis. So here are the elements of the story. There was a distribution channel that was involved in a turnaround. There were 10 locations in total, but 3 had a history of poor service, high turnover, low margin percent, considering all things as far as the industry they're in, the turns, the kind of product line, and so forth. And they were 3 companies we had bought, this chain that I was working for. And so the idea is, okay, the turnaround's going, the zero errors are dropping, da-da-da-da. We're not really getting paid for what we're doing. So I thought that the best thing to do would be implement a case study type of thing. So what happened was there were assignments for both the sales reps and the buyers at these 3 locations. The reps were to come up with 1 accepted and processed case per month of selling better, typically where they were getting a higher price and or changing the terms to our advantage. The buyers were supposed to come up with 2 cases per month of buying better, where they were getting actually a lower total procurement cost or they were getting extra services with a number 1, number 2 supplier who we thought we had a good future with. The branch managers were the sort of the pump primers. They also had to screen the cases to make sure they were acceptable, they were coherent, there was a lesson to be learned, and so forth. They were rehearsal coaches, and they kind of helped us start to see patterns and summarize the wisdom that these cases were trying to get across. And really there was a vice president of sales marketing at headquarters that was the main champion of the whole project. Now, what happened was the first 2 months were a bit scrambled. You know, there was kind of this deadline and everybody scurried around the last few days to get something together. In most cases, it wasn't a case study that happened necessarily in the previous month, but actually it happened maybe in the last 6 months. The branch managers had to wind up doing about 80% of the work that we thought sales reps and buyers might initially do. Although the third time around, everybody was getting with the program and there was traction, and so to turn around, the managers were only doing about 20% of the work. And while we were doing these case studies, the idea was each salesperson, buyer would get up and sort of present their case study. Sometimes the case was disguised for various reasons. Certainly if an issue came up which was unethical, the branch manager would say, well, this is not one that we want the salesperson or the buyer to get up and say, here's something that was dastardly that I did, but rather the manager would get up and say, here's a disguised case study on a pattern that we don't want to do again. You know, because when you get aggressive and you're pushing for value on either side of the fence, you know, it's a gray world, and you want to make sure that you're doing it with good ethics. At any rate, some tools and patterns emerged, which I want to review here. First of all, the reps all already had targeted accounts that had negative aspects because of our profit factor ranking report. We had identified customers that had low margin percent on average, they had low average order size on average. We had slow pay kind of accounts that needed to be shaped up or got some sort of material offset for the chronic slow pay, like higher prices. We had accounts that where we didn't have enough penetration or they weren't buying enough to support outside sales, given our new strata system of creating a telemarketing band. They had, of course, had their target accounts and so forth they go after. So they had a lot of ready-made confrontational opportunities where they're going to go out and sort of say, hey, you know, going forward we need to have a win-win relationship. The buyers, the tools they used, first we started posting the top 25 suppliers. We put their names right up there and ranked them by year-to-date sales. So for 6 months, how much had we bought from supplier number 1, 2, 3, 4 down. And we also showed the year-to-year increases. And at first we were tempted to put that on the wall, but we thought they're manufacturers' reps and they're going to run down and talk to the competition. So we put a report on the wall that showed numbers but didn't have any names attached to it. So people would then ask, well, what number am I? And we'd say, well, you're number 17. And they'd say, well, what I really want to know is who my biggest head-to-head competitor is, who you also represent. We'd say, oh, they're number 15 or they're number 19. It didn't matter whether they were higher or lower. These guys got all excited about, well, why am I not growing more year to year than some of these people? Why am I not further ahead or catching up with the other guy that I compete with head-to-head? That's when the buyers whipped out the second tool, which is we have created sort of a summary survey of all the different kinds of concessions that suppliers can give us that one way or another lower our total procurement cost. And we actually identified over 18 different categories. There was a lot of co-op dimensions. For example, co-op advertising money for a catalog, or co-op advertising for a trade show, or those kind of things. But there was a lot of soft money, special dating for special new items, take-back guarantees if certain things didn't, sell, those sort of things. So we had a grid of all the suppliers, again, coded by number, no names, and then all the different kinds of concessions. So we had X's across the boxes that's where the deal was being done. So you'd say, well, you're number 17, and here's what you currently have done. Now, there are a lot of other areas you could work with us. And in exchange, we're often willing to do things too if you're willing to do things too. And so that created a lot of energy and a lot of proactive new opportunities that generated a lot of new case studies. What would happen as we started to look at the cases, we started to see sort of patterns that would emerge. We'd say, oh, that's an example of a customer asking for extra services, but they really don't deserve them because they're not a AAA plus kind of customer. And so in the past, we might have just done it without sort of saying, wait a minute, let's upfront contract and bank measurable goodwill brownie points, or even suggest that this is the cost, we need a fee, we want to put an extra service charge on the invoice. And successfully getting the buyer to concede that, yes, there were goodwill points banked, or yes, go ahead and put a service fee on the invoice. We noticed that when you go to owner-operators, and you would say, look, here is a sales threshold you have to buy per month to qualify for ongoing minimum monthly visits from our outside salesperson. Otherwise, you're going to telemarketing. There are a number of guys that said, well, all right, I don't want to give that up. It's sort of an esteem issue more than anything else, it seemed. We found another category was our suppliers sometimes would make special orders happen because they would give us better pricing or more flexible delivery dates. They'd waive minimum orders of some sort. But when we got those kind of extras from our suppliers, we didn't think that it was free and we would always get it. We said, the only reason the suppliers are giving us concessions right now is because we bought a lot of stuff from them on a repeat basis over a long period of time. And we can't go back to the well and keep doing this. So we have to put a value on that, and we have to turn around and charge the customer who's going to benefit from this special service for the true real cost of what's going on. And so even though in theory there was a concession, we figured out what the concession was worth, and we upfront negotiated and charged the customers for those concessions, even though there was an out-of-pocket expense. So those kinds of patterns emerged, and we came up with general guidelines for how to deal with those kind of things. Observations, as the salespeople got up and taught their cases, you could see that they were getting braver. It's the guys that had the case studies and taught them that would go out and generate even more case studies in the future. And certainly the testimonial successes motivated the other people because they were thinking, well, heck, if that guy can do it, he's operating the same marketplace I am, he has the same competition I do, and if he's making those prices and terms stick at that kind of account, why shouldn't I be able to do that? And we found, of course, there were unethical issues that popped up that helped to decide where the boundary line was in the gray world of negotiations here. And the key thing was just the repetition and the teaching that started to build the motivational value. And the results were fantastic. About 12 months later, year to year, our sales were up about 5%, which with those three locations was about industry growth rate. But they had an aggressive small order program going on, so it's very possible that they could have, in a sense, driven away 5% of their sales was just 35-40% of their transactional volume. The The key thing was the average gross margin percent went up 4 percentage points from 23 to 27. Average order size went up over 25%. Extra service charges, which were really kind of unknown or unthought of, had exploded from less than $1,000 to well over $10,000. Accounts receivable and receivables past 60 days improved because we went out and negotiated. Pay up, pay more, or get within terms. Rep compensation was up over 23% because they were all tied in one way or the other to gross margin generated, so we had a big lift there. And most importantly, the operating profit was up over 400% at these locations. I think that, in summary, when I looked at what's going on, my conclusions were that, we're all creatures of habit, and even though we intellectually understand something new, until we actually try and fail and get up and try again, we're not really learning and starting to change ourselves. So we have to unlearn and relearn those habits just through repetition and practice, and case studies was a good way of doing it. Also, I found that our customers were buying our emotional conviction, and I started to think that there were 3 levels of emotional conviction. In part of it, the one part is sort of the outside in. If you act the part, you become the part. You kind of go out there and you have these little pat phrases you start to learn, but that doesn't mean from the inside out you really believe it. But once our employees, our outside inside salespeople particularly, really started to believe that, we really did have distinctive great service. We really were lowering total procurement cost, and they felt that in their bones, they emoted that conviction. And then a third thing was that once we started to get some momentum, realizing that they had this huge new advantage, it's kind of like, gee, the wind is my back and I'm pedaling downhill. There was this desire to sort of go out there and get as much as they could while they could get it. So there was a momentum, positive fortune, the tide is with me kind of phenomenon that was going on. So once it took off, it was very self-fueling and made remarkable results. Thanks. This module is put in last place for Section 4 because it's the capstone. It's kind of the fantasy of every wholesale distributor as far as the ideal account relationship scenario. And for everybody in the company to understand what it means, if you want to have a permanently high productive economic environment where all 4 stakeholders win, you have to have these kind of relationships, win-win system kind of relationships with best customers and best suppliers to go forward. Maybe it's, to give you a vision, it's kind of like going across central Illinois or Kansas. You see some farms, there are lots of little oil wells out there, and they're just plugging away, pumping out about 2-3 barrels of oil a day or something like that. And what we want is a lot of accounts that are real solid, they're growing equal to or greater than the industry, they're buying their majority from us, it's routinized, everything's working perfect, total harmony, and they're in a sense growing us, and every year they pump out another 15% more oil, which helps us grow on a profitable basis. So what we have to do is look at how these relationships evolve, understand really what the 3 terms or adjectives, win-win, systems contract, best value buying customers mean. And then I'm going to offer some simple guidelines for how we can make sure these relationships evolve to being win-win and not win-lose. Let's look at the evolution of customer relationships. You start by getting your foot in the door. We sell service. They like our service. They buy more. That's the service retention model. And at some point, one or both of us say, maybe we should routinize or formalize this relationship a little bit more and systematically go to work on some or all the elements of total procurement cost. And that then gets us into a new game where we're trying to evolve system contracts. And the system contracts can evolve themselves. In this next slide, they start off simply by, look, if you agree to buy more from me on an ongoing basis, I'm going to give you not only a bigger volume discount price, but I'm also going to give you sort of a cooperative discount price. The next level may be, and if you buy even more, we may do extra services like special stock certain items and guarantee they'll be 100% in stock for you. We may do one-off customized extra services for fees or certainly custom bid pricing. We may go to the next step, which is let's not just deliver it to a back dock, but let's deliver it right into the plan of your business, where in a sense you're outsourcing internal handling cost to us. But by doing that, we get rid of handoffs, which has to have paperwork to go with it. So if we can eliminate handoffs, eliminate paperwork, eliminate errors, that's great. We may even run a storeroom for a customer, and the inventory that's in the storeroom may even be ours until the customer consumes it. So that's on-site consignment inventory. We may then go to paperless processing, which is involving EDI or maybe internet applications these days. In some channels where you have huge volume consumer consumables, like in the wholesale drug and grocery channel, some of the independent distributors are even messing around with point-of-sale, continuous feedback replenishment systems, which is kind of what Walmart pioneered. Now, the reasons for the routinization ideally are, okay, if we work together, we can find some savings here. The question is, can we share the costs and share the savings? If the supplier has to pay for all the upfront, transformational costs and doesn't get any of the savings, or only gets 10% of the 90% of the savings, it can become quite unbalanced and become basically a profitless relationship. So it's important that both people understand the total transformational costs, figure out how to share those, and the total economic juice that's being generated, figure out how to share those. And the key is, we're lowering our total sales service costs while they're lowering their total procurement cost. Now, on total procurement costs, we've seen this slide before, where I talked a little bit about it from the supplier's viewpoint, saying, you know what, I've decided to throw 2 suppliers out, give everything to you, to consolidate all my bargaining power for lower prices, to consolidate shopping, paperwork, 0 errors, on-time delivery, get rid of expediting, and so forth. So I'm not going to do any more at this time, but this still is a central model to this goal of creating these kinds of contracts. The big questions that come up, though, are, do we have the basic service brilliance, which is sort of our ticket to be a suitor or a reasonable partner for a marriage, because nobody wants to marry or put a flake or put all of their eggs in one supplier basket that may be uncertain. Do we know the true costs for all the concessions and services we're going to do? Because typically we keep thinking we're going to make it up on volume, so we do all these extra services for no charge. Somehow we think, at everyday low prices we're still going to make it up, but we don't. Are we flexible enough to do the extras perfectly, consistently, and efficiently? Because a lot of these services are going to be new capabilities that frontliners are going to have to develop and then be able to do on a consistent, systematic basis. And ultimately, we have to sell all of these things at a price that exceeds the incremental cost of doing them. And the most important thing is, can we target value-buying customers? Because if we go after pure price buyers, they're not going to value it. They're just going to still, go to the low price. We waste our time. And sometimes you come up against psychological buyers who will actually say, I understand what you're selling, and you're right, but I'm going to buy from my friend. In this slide, I've broken buying philosophy into 3 categories: psychological, value, and pure price. The percent of customers that fall in each category is a guesstimate. I'm going to say that when it comes to buyers that are psychological buyers, it could be anywhere from 1 to 15%. If you're dealing with a segment of customer where it's owner-operators who get involved in the purchase themselves, they're very susceptible to being wined and dined and stroked and reciprocating, and taking care of their friends. On the other hand, if you go into full-time professional purchasing agents, they're under the gun to get 5 off from everybody, because that's what we're asking all our suppliers. They are not going to be psychologically stroked. They fall either in the value buying or the pure price category. I would actually contend that when it comes to value buying, maybe 80% or more of customers are value buyers. They understand things like bargain price, bargain service, bargain price, huge supply. That doesn't mean that they get to use their personal judgment. Maybe the corporate philosophy from some bully bean counter back at headquarters is, no, you will absolutely take the lowest price in a reverse auction format. But I think those things don't last for long, because ultimately true value does win out. In the value buying category, I could subdivide it into 2. There are people who say, you know what, you're right, no problem, fine, I'm happy to pay a fair price because you're giving me fair value. That might be 20% of the 80. So 60% really are, although they're value buyers at heart, they're masquerading as pure price buyers. And I think the test there to find out if somebody is a pure price buyer or they're a value buyer is to say, price is so important that you mean that if the phone rings, it's a supplier you've never heard of before, they claim to have the same product that I do, and they're charging a penny cheaper, you're going to buy the product from those guys. You know, and 60% of these guys will say, well, no. And you say, all right, now that I've gotten rid of the big stall off the table, what else is important? And these people really don't like to, you know, have you come back and keep holding the sword up in front of them, saying, you know what, we got the best value, here are our metrics, etc. But over time, I think a lot of them, their mask will fall off, and you can convert them back to passive, value-accepting guys who are willing to give you a fair price for what you're doing. There are more questions here. Can we achieve a service value difference and make it an issue? Can we convert these strip and shop guys back to passive, profitable ones? Can we just say no to those guys? We run all the numbers and say, you know, based on how you want to buy or how the number's looking, we don't want to do it. It's got to be win-win or no deal. And how do you preventively up front screen, target, sell, and install systems that will be win-win? And I've got 7 steps, sort of a guideline process that I can recommend for you. First of all, we qualify the account. Do they understand, speak, buy, total procurement cost? Acid test is, do they have any other suppliers who've been with them for a period of time that we can call to see if they're happy doing business with this customer? And if they say, oh, by all means, call these 3 people, and you do, and they say, boy, do business with these guys, they are great. We have a win-win deal with them. That's who you want to do business with. Trust is a track record. They have a track record of win-win relationships with other suppliers. If the target customer says, oh, no, we don't give out those kind of names, that's top secret, whatever, that's code for no, we try to strip and shop them all. And so there isn't anybody out there who's happy with doing business with us. So if they pass the screening test, then we go ahead and do the slam dunk, super full team focused target massage job on them, to the point where we may say, hey, do you want to talk about some sort of long-term contract relationship to routinize the TPC elements? If so, who is going to be the co-manager on their side that's going to work with our co-manager? Presumably the sales guy, but not necessarily so. How are together we going to score total procurement cost progress? How together are we going to score the costs of creating the system and make sure they're shared? How are we going to score the benefits to make sure, 1, we get them, and 2, we share them? And if we do all that, can we have testimonials from you to yet other people in your organization? Because what you find in big companies, big customer companies, is key people turn over, get promoted, new people come in, we have to start all over again. And it's more powerful. We have letters, testimonials from outgoing people as to why the system's great and so forth. And also it'd be helpful if they would agree to be testimonials for us when we go to try to sell other big customers on these kinds of programs. If we do all that up front, we say, fine, let's do a flow chart, everything as is, let's flow chart what could be, and then figure out how to make the transformational happen. Because to be done right really is a professional consulting type of job, maybe there should be upfront consulting fees that are paid, or certainly shared money is put up by both people to make sure there's a mutual commitment and skin in the game. You go ahead and you install the system, you continuously improve it and measure it, because when you measure it you don't get the results you thought. That redoubles your efforts to keep doing it, and so the system evolves. But then you'll find it's a dynamic, alive situation, because the customers' mix of business changes, they get into new things, new areas, new problems, and we have to tune the system to stay there. So I think if we do it right, it becomes an evergreen relationship. And then we just keep doing our testimonial selling both within the company, outside the company, to help maintain it, so it doesn't get back to, I don't know who you guys are, I want 5 off, I don't understand the past, I can switch easily to somebody else and get the same deal. And we have the proof that that's not the case. I think that when it comes to long-term profit growth for your company, the only way to get it is to partner customers who are growing faster than their industry, so they'll grow us. We've got to be able to do it on a win-win basis. The big question is, will they marry us? Here's some summary solution points. Achieve basic service brilliance. That's your ticket to the dance. It's a way of being considered a final suitor for these kinds of programs. When it comes to these contracts, we have to shape up or ship out the losing contracts we may already have and learn our lessons from them, so next time we do it better and right from go. And then if we super focus on a few best qualified screened out accounts, apply the 7-step process, knowing our true costs all the way along, we can create contracts that we will enjoy for a long time. We'll make good money, the customer will be happy, and that is the key to our long-term success. Thanks. This is the beginning of section 5 of the video series, and all these modules are more geared towards helping us succeed at the plays that we've already laid out, the how-to plays that we saw in sections 3 and 4. And one of the things that comes about when you try to get an organization in better shape is trying to get everybody moving at the same sustainable heart rate is what I call it. And maybe the best way to get this across is to use an analogy. If you're an overnourished 45-year-old person who's carrying a lot of extra weight and you haven't done any exercise in 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden, you decide you're going to get fit, you're going to find the ripped athlete that's hiding inside that overstuffed or upholstered body. You go down, you get a sweatsuit, and you get sneakers, and you go out to the high school track, and you do stretching exercises you remember from high school, and you start to run one lap around the track. What is your body going to say to you? You may not even get around all the way around the track before it says, stop, I'm going to die now. And the next day, and you do, because moderation in all things is a good policy here. And the next day when you get out of bed, you think, what hurts? Everything hurts. It turns out that every part of your body, whether it's the toughness of the tendons or the tone of the muscle or the capillary action or the way the heart beats and respiratory aerobic systems, it's all uniformly, consistently out of shape. And you've stressed every part of the body pretty much doing a whole body vigorous thing like running. But if you go out to the track the next day and you do your stretch, you're thinking, I'm not even going to make halfway around the lap, you may surprise yourself. In spite of the pain, you may go a lap and a quarter. And what's happened is the body has actually come back stronger. With only thing in the universe where you stress it comes back stronger is life form. And so we've asked the body to re-stimulate itself and grow and improve and strengthen. So the key is we hang on to that pace for a long time. Now in the corporate setting, everybody is part of that total corporate body, and everybody is at a certain established historical pace of energy, commitment, whatever. When we ask the body to do new things it's never done before, it's going to be stressful. So earlier on, I suggested that, if everybody on average could work 10% harder, they get a little early, stay a little bit late to watch these video modules, start working little project teams, stuff that outside the normal humdrum, turn the crank kind of activity that's going on, and be able to sustain it for a long time, that's the key. And when you go and you say to a group of employees, hey, here's the vision, here's what could happen, here's what's in it for you, are you excited, what do you say, let's hear it, and you ask for a cheer. If you listen closely, you will hear 3 types of cheers that you see at the bottom of the slide. Here one guy's really enthusiastic, another guy who's, I'm with it, I'm enthusiastic, middle arrow, the third guy's kind of going, oh, groan, another fad, this too will pass. Well, you actually now what you have to do is go to the big arrow guy and say, you know what, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're acting like this is a 100-yard dash. Could you crank down your enthusiasm, crank down your expectations, and just hang in there for the long term? Number 2, you're right on. And now we have to go to number 3 and say, hey, buddy, what's going on here? And you start to realize that when you get down to the grassroots level, you talk to each employee, not everybody really understands the vision equally well. They may all say they do, but some guys need 5 repetitions, some need 15, etc. Also, we all have our self-preservation fears more or less. To a degree, it's in our mammalian fiber. All mammals, if they're not challenged, they're not stressed out, they sit because they have to conserve their energy for when they will be challenged. So human beings, the only people who run around trying to make the world a better place to live in and do a better thing for our kids and our grandkids, etc. So it's our natural state to just want to sit and relax and conserve. Also, we have personal emotional fears of failing because we tried in the past and we get chided for it, not supported correctly, and so we're reluctant to try things. But whatever's going on there, you'll find a dynamic equilibrium will emerge. Now, a dynamic equilibrium is like your body staying at 98.6. If the room gets hot, your pores open up, you start to secrete sweat, it evaporates, it cools you off, it keeps you at 98.6. If the room goes down to 60 degrees, you start to shake and shiver and clench and do things that create body heat to try to keep you at 98.6. So when we go and try to do new resolutions, there seem to be equally powerful hidden offsetting commitments that keep us from getting, too far along in our improvement before we kind of go back to, the same old weight, the same old routine, etc. So let's look at three graphs of progress scenarios. One situation is we bump along sort of in a dynamic equilibrium. Every New Year's Eve comes along and we say, this is the year I'm going to get in shape. It lasts 15 days. We bag it. We go back to our normal condition. In fact, because we start to decline from we worked out hard for 2 weeks, and now we start to decline, we feel so depressed we actually go past our equilibrium to a new low until we feel so bad we bounce off of that and come back a little bit. So we kind of ebb and flow on the weight on the scale, or we ebb and flow as far as our exercise around some equilibrium point. On the top dotted chart, you see a stair-step deal where we get to a peak, and instead of dropping back down, we consolidate our learning, hold on to our plateau, find new things that help us get to yet another integration, and we keep going. And the better we do and the more we do, the more we become encouraged. So it's a virtuous self-fueling cycle. Another scenario is the death spiral, the vicious spiral, where we get to a bottom, we feel so depressed we can't get off of that, so we actually do new desperate things to take us to yet a new lower level until we hit bottom and join a 12-step program of some sort. And if we get into that downward spiral, we get into complaining, I'm a victim, we blame other people, we take no personal responsibility. The worse we feel, the worse we do kind of thing. So now the big questions are, can we get everybody to want the same vision? Can we figure out how to break the New Year's resolution pattern? And can we, to a certain degree, diffuse the language and the assumptions of complaining and blaming and feeling bad and doing bad? So I'm going to suggest what I call 4 languages that we're going to use to try to shift our thinking and get in touch with hidden commitments and hidden sort of offsetting assumptions. First of all, let's do the language from complaining to commit. If somebody complains, what we have to say reflexively is, I like your energy, because when we complain, we care enough about something to even bring it up. So we have to find where is the hidden river of commitment. And it turns out that if somebody says, look, this is a waste of time, what they're saying is, I'm committed to not wasting time, which is good. The next thing we want to do is to say, well, are you blaming the environment around you? Can you take any personal responsibility for making things better? So it's not 100% the world against me, I'm a victim. Maybe it's 95 or 80% the world against me, but 5, 10, 15%, on the margin, I could do a little bit more personally. The third language we're going to use is from going from New Year's resolutions to finding the competing commitments that cause the oscillation. And when we do that, the next thing we want to do is find out the unspoken assumptions that have us in their grip. We don't know that until we sort of articulate them and look at them and go, oh, well, that's really kind of dated or foolish. And we switch to conscious, spoken assumptions that stand the test of time or the reality of what's going on. You've seen this pattern in a lot of past modules where I've said the assumption that all customers are good customers is not a true one. And I've given you other assumptions that I think fit the times. So when we find those assumptions that hold us and switch them to assumptions we hold, there's great power in doing that, and it helps our new resolutions move along. So if we go back to the party pooper guy with the little arrow and say to the buddy, hey, what's the problem? And he says, well, this is another dumb idea. Well, maybe his hidden commitment energy source is, well, look, I don't want to waste my time. We've had fads in the past, and they come and they go, and I got all excited, and I got my time wasted. And you say, all right, so great, waste not, want not. I like your efficiency mode. That's a good commitment. But about blame, when you say they come and they go, whose fault was it that they came and went? Is it 100% everybody else's fault? Could you take any personal responsibility for why it didn't succeed? Well, yeah, I could. But, let's find the other competing commitment. Well, it turns out that, it's the futility of individual action. I could try, but I'm so convinced that so many other guys aren't trying either. What can one guy do around here when everybody else is picking their nose? And I get my heart broken. I think, oh, this is going to be great, and I put my time and energy into it, and then I find out nobody else is doing it, and I, get my heart broken. So what we're saying, so what are the assumptions that underlie this? The assumption is if we try, we'll fail, I'll fail. Yeah, and what else? Well, if I fail, then I'll feel awful, people will yell at me, maybe somebody's going to kill me. If you really dig deep into psychological thinking, you'll find some people way, way, way down at the root are afraid they're going to get killed, and maybe that was sort of a real concern when they were 3 and getting bonked on the head, by an alcoholic parent when they did some, age-appropriate dumb thing. So we want to try to get in touch with those things because they really hold us. If we can do that and switch from the assumptions that hold us that, hey, what can one guy do around here, to, you know what, we're all in this. And the assumption that, if I fail, I'm going to get blamed, killed, criticized, killed, type of thing, as opposed to, well, of course we're all going to fail. When you try new stuff, you fall on your face forward, and you learn from it, and you get up and you try again, but as long as the North Star is still there and you believe in it, and the mistakes are good mistakes, why not? Let's go. And then the third assumption is we're going to fail like all past fads, and we have to say, but this isn't a fad. This is built on a very systematic, intellectual, strategic understanding of the marketplace and what's going on and what sells and what works for high-performance distribution companies. So if we can move to those new assumptions and just look at them and talk about it, we're starting to make some progress. So if we can do all that, now we can start on our way, but what kind of systems are we going to introduce that will encourage everybody to pick up their oar and start rowing so we all know that everybody else is rowing and I'm rowing too. We need systems that help us all to be what we want to become. So for example, one of them will be publishing praising statements that we'll see in the next module. So the takeaways for this particular module are that we are going to need extra transformational work to make our productivity plays, our new success assumptions work. And in a sense, you're doing some right now by watching this video. Secondly, it's going to be a marathon, so we need to give 10% more effort day in, day out, for a long time. Third, if everyone's going to get signed up and hang in there, we've got to uncover the hidden pushback commitments and the hidden flawed big assumptions that hold us, that make a homeostasis or a dynamic equilibrium happen, so our new resolutions won't really get off the ground. Thanks. We start to do any new program, there are these concerns that come to the surface, like, well, why should I work hard because I don't think everybody else is? The futility of individual action. Why should I vote for president? They're both pretty much the same anyway, and what's one vote going to matter, and 10 zillion trillion votes. Another concern is, if I really work hard and other people don't, I'm carrying other people, and that bugs me. Or I don't really understand what's directly in it for me. So usually when you start new programs, there may be some initial new enthusiasm, but very quickly the enthusiasm dies because we have a lack of what I call praising oxygen. And so I think the cure for programs fading out, or one of them, is a systematic one which I call publishing praising statements. So let's just define what a praising statement is and how to deliver them. A person deserves a praising statement if they do one of the three following things. If they go beyond normal duties, they make a significant extra effort, that could deserve a praising statement. If they achieve new personal best, they could be in last place in the pecking order, but if they come up with new best numbers, that deserves a praising statement. If they do consistently exemplary role model kind of work that other people are inspired by or want to follow and sort of play up to, that can deserve a praising statement from time to time. We're not going to give praising statements for people just showing up, breathing, type of stuff. Now, when you give a praising statement, to be very mechanical about this, there are a few key components to it. Here they are. First, when you give a praising statement to somebody, even if there's a group of people and you're in charge of the group meeting, you should look at that person and address them personally and use their name. Don't say, well, and speak about them in the third person of the group at large. Look right at them. Secondly, you have to mention a specific task that was done. Then you have to mention personal qualities that they brought to bear to make that task happen. And then you have to mention benefits that accrued to somebody, sometimes multiple levels, to the department, to the team, to the company, to the customer, that kind of thing. If you can make sure that the condition for a praising statement is met, and you have these elements, then the person who receives the praising will see it as the authentic, real deal, not manipulative. Even if you do it poorly, if you have to write it down and you deliver it later after the fact, it still works. Now, you can use this in a lot of ways. For example, in companies that I've worked with and turned around, we've printed up little 4x6 cards, which we call Catch Us Doing Things Right, Wrong cards. And we give them to customers, salespeople keep in their pockets, because if anybody gets excited or honked off, big energy, positive or negative, we say, wait a minute, there's got to be a praising statement if it's positive energy, or a learning lesson if there's negative energy in this. So the first question says, what happened? What was the specific task or act that happened that got you excited or honked off? Second, who did it involve? Who was the agent of making this good thing or bad thing happen? What personal qualities did they show or not show to make this happen? And so what? What was in it for you? What was the benefit? And so that organizes you to start to create these, and then you can consolidate them and publish them. And I suggest publishing them perhaps every Friday, because people usually think of TGIF. I'm over the hump on Wednesday. I've just got a paycheck here. I can't wait to be free on the weekend. So it's not a bad thing to go home with a couple pages of praising statements that any and all employees at a company have been giving to one another, because people have been showing up early, staying late, putting their oar in the water, making things happen. If you can, and so maybe you have an editor, and by Wednesday, quotas, branch managers, salespeople, whatever, got to get, department managers have to get in a certain number of praising statements to get into the newsletter. If that happens, here are the benefits. All the employees get these things, they start looking through them, and they see well, first of all, before it's published, we start to get in the habit of realizing, a lot of good stuff goes along. It's easy to focus on negatives. It's easy to complain. It's easy not to see all of our blessings and all the positive progress that's going on. So that's a key thing, is to develop that habit. Secondly, when we're looking through the praising statement publication and we say our name, we're apt to circle it, run home, show mom, put it on the refrigerator. Most people, when they see those things, feel great about themselves, love the public notoriety they're getting, and frankly would like to get more. Another group of people are looking at these things going, holy smokes, the futility of individual action? No problem. It turns out lots of people have got their oars in the water. I feel encouraged to keep doing what I'm doing. This whole project, this puppy could get off the ground. I'm not alone. There's hope. And then a third group of people after the second, third, fourth publication are saying, it seems like everybody in the world's getting praising statements, but I haven't gotten one. And I'm thinking, I'm getting a little paranoid. I think maybe people are noticing that maybe I'm a salary-sucking coaster, I'm not really buying into the program, and maybe I better get with the program, or I'm feeling so uncomfortable, maybe I better start looking for another job. And they may self-weed themselves out of a high-performance environment because it just isn't their cup of tea. Now, people are going to have pushbacks about this. People are going to say, Bruce, this sounds totally manipulative. I would counter and say that as long as you say to everybody, look, here is the science, realities of praising statements. There are no secrets here. Here are the little cards. Everybody is encouraged to do them for everybody else. And as long as we meet these criteria, you ask the person, was this manipulative or is this the real deal? Say, no, man, that's the real deal. I put the ball in the hoop, and I had to do some great moves to make that happen and so forth, and the team did pick up 2 points. So in other words, no, it's real. And some people say, well, isn't this glad handing? I think here the difference is if it's a real praising statement, it's because something significant has happened. I remember for a long time a guy named Sergei Bubka was the dominant pole vaulter for, a dozen years in the world. And I think in practice the guy could do about 9-10 inches higher than what he would do in the meets. But because the Soviet Union would pay him, $20,000 or some big bonus check every time he set a world record, he would only set world records in 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch increments, because he thought, well, I'm going to milk this for 18 world records over the next 6-7 years. So when that happens, you think, well, that's kind of gaming the system. But, you know, people are just going out there doing their best and they pop a new personal best by 3 inches. You know, that's worth a praising statement. Other people might say, well, this is, if I give praising statements to my boss or, an attractive woman on the payroll, isn't this sucking up or isn't this hitting on people? Again, I just say that as long as you meet the rigid criteria of what deserves a praising statement and you meet the format, these are not worries to have. And then there'll be some people who say, look, I just don't think it's necessary. Everybody knows whether they're doing a good job or not. And we got numbers all over the place now, and so they get the feedback. They know what's going on. Now, I think what's going on here is we have a praise tightwad on our hands, and to a certain degree, we're all praise tightwads. And if we're going to get over the praise tightwad hump, I want to go take the 4 languages I introduced in Module 5.1 and use them again here. So the complaint is, hey, these people already know that they're doing a good job. So we say, oh, I like your energy. Your commitment is to automated sort of feedback of hard numbers. If we just have numbers everywhere, we don't have to tell anybody they're doing a good job. They already know. But when it comes to switching from blame to personal responsibility, could we say, well, all right, you're saying these people are wrong not to know they're great. You're blaming them for not knowing they're good. But could you take some personal responsibility for filling some of the gaps? Because not all praising statements are going to be seen in the hard numbers. A lot of these tend to be sort of crude, big output numbers that took lots of little achievements to make the big number happen. Well, yeah, I guess I could fill some gaps and, delays and so forth. Well, okay, let's go for the language of resolution. Are you going to try? Yeah, well, I'll try. And as Yoda said, there is no try. You either do or you don't do. What would keep you from actually doing this on a regular, reflexive, happy basis? And you find out the competing commitment really is, well, it's not fair to me. Because as I was working my buns off to get to this position in life, nobody patted me on the back. Nobody gave me any recognition or appreciation. I just had to gut it out all by myself. So in other words, because I might have been poorly managed or raised or taught, why should they get a better deal? And they say, well, let's look at the assumption that's operating here. Your assumption is that because past generations do a bad job, that future generations should do a bad job? Under the light of day, that just doesn't make sense. We need to re-script. And the new assumption we have is we should do constructive things. And if our North Star says we got to do transformational plays, and it's going to take a lot of change and a lot of failing, we have to have a lot of enthusiasm, we need praising statements. And so we have to get over this idea that, frankly, none of us deserve praising statements to everybody does if they meet the criteria. So I would say on assumptions for praisings, numbers don't even come close to telling the whole story of what's going on to make the good numbers happen. I know in Oscar nights, when the people get up and win their Oscars, they have to say thank you to 10,000 people who frankly did all the work so the stars could waltz in and get all the credit and a $20 million fee. Turns out there are lots of people out there who are emotional people. They kind of live to serve and help others. They're natural nurturers, and they live and particularly feed off of recognition and honest praising. Another concern is if I give people praising, won't they get arrogant, sort of hubris? They'll say, I'm really good. I can sort of take it easy, and they'll slack off. I disagree. I think more often people say, I love it, I want more, than the latter problem. Not that it couldn't happen once in a while. I would also say that praising really is, in a sense, the oxygen of progress. It's the oxygen of transformational change. It's the oxygen of learning new stuff, particularly when beginnings are difficult, when we're all fragile novices. And I think combining two concepts together, which is praising for good mistakes, which we'll talk about in a future module, is vital. So here are the key points. We want to keep enthusiasm high. We need to encourage that 100% of the people are on board and got their oar in the water and they believe and they're going to try to maintain a steady effort over a long period of time. We have a big inside out, like I really believe this in my bones and that's why I'm motivated. But in the short term, we can use outside-in tools, catching people doing things right with the 4x6 cars, the newspaper publishing, the 4 languages of complaints, and that's going to help us to get where we want to go. Thanks. To keep up the energy we need to move along the path towards our North Stars of high performance, service, distribution, economics, making all of our plays happen, changing ourselves really as we do this, we have the same problem of trying to achieve good health habits. Let's look at this next slide and look at ourselves in the mirror. First, we see that health is the first wealth. In China, they say that having fortune and friends and gifts and skills and so forth are all like zeros, but health is the digit 1 that goes in front of the zeros to give it value. Without health, all the rest are not worth much to you. Most of us, when we get to be about 35, if we do any kind of athletic activity, our body starts talking back to us. Most of us know the rules, what we should do for good health habits. We know the benefits of good health habits. And yet the average New Year's resolution only lasts about 15 days. And so people kind of go along until something really breaks down. In other words, they kind of have an alarm go off that says, oh my gosh, I really should do something now, which I haven't been doing for a long time. If we're successful, often it's because we go into a total rehab kind of program where we totally our culture around us, who our friends are, what we work, all sorts of things, so that we can maintain a key thing is there are the systems which help us be. My question is, instead of waiting till alarms go off, what can we do now from a preventative viewpoint to put in systems that will help us continue to become what we want to become? And I've tried so far to offer, in a sense, sell the people in viewerland there on the benefits of high-performance distribution economics for everybody. I've offered a number of cookbook how-to productivity plays. I've even put on my psychologist hat and addressed, kind of the hidden emotional counter-commitments and flawed assumptions we may have as far as moving forward. But on top of that, we still need more motivational support systems. And here's some examples that we can find from other areas. If any of you ever participated in team sports in your youth, you go out for preseason practice, and there was sort of a multiplication of motivation. When you felt you were like down and I'm going to barf and I can't go any further, somebody else would say, come on, come on. You're thinking, my gosh, if they're doing it, I guess I've got to dig deeper and I'm going to do it. Because everybody was kind of panicked that they'd be the last guy in the herd, and that was the one that was going to get cut or weeded. So we didn't worry about our preservation skills. We just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing. I remember when I went to graduate school in business, and where I went, they were teaching case studies, and everybody was panicked all the way up through November, Thanksgiving, that when you went into a classroom, the teacher was going to come over and say, Bruce, why don't you start the case off today? It was a 1 out of 80 shot, but you had 3 case studies a day. And the longer you went without speaking up in class, the greater the odds were they'd come and call on you. So it was kind of this roulette tension thing, which made you be super prepared for every case study and created a lot of artificial tension, which helped us study and be the students we really wanted to be. You've seen hokey things. The United Way every year has, artificial goals, and they have deadlines, they have thermometers outside of businesses, etc. You can give a check to the United Way anytime you want, any time of the year. They'd be happy to take it. It's just by creating these programs, we create a little bit of structural discipline, we create a little enthusiasm, a little bit of artificial creative tension, if you will, to get people to be a little more creative, be a little bit more action-oriented and get things done. And if we put numbers everywhere and we give prizes to the winners, that sort of burns out very quickly because there are only a few winners and most of the people aren't the winners. And really the winners we're sort of creating false heroes and false bums to a large degree. So I've talked in past modules about not giving prizes to the winners, but making the winners responsible for trying to teach and move along the people that are lagging. But even when we look at these gimmicky kinds of things, I think what's missing is some sort of long-term, sustainable, motivational system, if you will. So here are some suggestions. I've so far said if we post service metrics everywhere, every day, and everybody's job is to make them happen, that creates tension. That makes us do whatever we have to, variable our speed, be flexible, that sort of thing. If we put numbers everywhere and make all employees responsible for growing annual value added or gross margin dollar per warm body on the payroll, that creates a certain amount of tension also and creativity to try to make that number get better. Publish praising statements. Give us renewed hope and energy to keep moving along because everybody else is moving along. What I'd like to do is propose a six-sided model, if you will, in this next diagram. In this hexagon, you can imagine the yellow boundaries as being, like a cage at a zoo. And the bigger the space they give wild animals, the more perky the animals become. If you put them in tiny little cages, they just sleep until it's feeding time. So ideally, we want to empower people as much as possible, give them as much space, latitude, flexibility, but we don't want chaos. And what naturally aligns everybody are the North Star metrics that we surround them with and say, are you doing these metrics every day, or are you moving towards our goals for these metrics every day? So the systems that I would have on the boundaries, which would say, are you doing what you need to be doing and are you getting better, would be the six things you see around the perimeter. And because of time reasons, I'm going to just say that I've touched on some of the educational aspects. We've certainly talked about service a lot. Circle 2 and putting up service metrics every day would be, system 2. Financial numbers everywhere, making people responsible for them, would be a third system. 4, what's in it for me? Continuous selling on that is important. The things that need, I think, more expansion than we haven't seen before are orientation education, for under number 1. How do we turn everybody into sort of an adult partner? How do we dismantle the traditional boss-subordinate, parent-child relationship? And perhaps the most mysterious is, how do we incorporate a mastery system with internal benchmarking ranking systems that helps mastery happen? So I'm going to spend the next few modules talking about those things. And for the balance of this module, let's talk about education. So far, in past modules, I've touched on Learn and Earn certification. There was a case study back in Section 4. In Section 3, we talked about the end of the month, one-page, here's how I want to grow, educate myself form that might replace an annual top-down review. This would encourage bottom-up learning to be going on. So in the rest of this module, let's kind of summarize, crystallize thoughts on initial orientation that all new employees would go through. I've talked about some of this in other modules, but I think we need to sort of summarize it here if we can. In this next slide, the general format would be that we hire an employee, and typically they're hired on a probationary basis because they've got to go through 4 weeks of orientation boot camp. If they don't get through it, they could drop out. In fact, I've seen people with these kinds of systems where day 2 or 3 of orientation, the employee leaves and goes and gets their old job because they decide they really don't want to do all this learning and all this responsibility stuff, etc. Every day of boot camp, the morning session goes towards studying, memorizing, taking tests. The PM part is practical stuff. You're out in the field, you're stapling yourself to an order and following it through the system. You're rotating amongst different jobs, sitting at everybody's elbow to see what they do, that kind of stuff. You're going out to visit customers to understand who they are and why they rely on us, etc. And then we break the training up into modules, and we have all the employees take turns being sort of mentors or teachers for those modules. And as a general rule, you assign the employee who is weakest at that module to be the mentor, because the first-time teacher is going to learn a lot more than a first-time student. Now, ideally you pitch the amount of information that you're going to pump through this program to an above-average employee. So if you're really a superstar sort of student kind of person, you're going to blow through this thing pretty easily. But if you're a little bit of a slower learner or a different learner, it's going to struggle, and you may have to work nights and weekends. And as long as you care, the company should care, type of thing, as far as getting through this system and giving you all the help you need. And when it comes to tests, every morning of the program, there's a little test, multiple questions. But you've got to be able to memorize and regurgitate. If you don't get 100, it's okay. You just have to keep taking the test every morning until you get 100. So the question isn't, can you get through in a certain amount of time using nights and weekends as much as you need? The question is, can you master everything 100% all the way through? So it's important to have different learning approaches and patience with different kinds of learning styles. Now, As far as the content that you would have in the different modules, you'd want big picture information. Why do wholesaler distributors exist, for example? A lot of the material in this video could be taken and repurposed for orientation. You'd want to have process flow charts of how things happen with the kind of metrics at the end that department is trying to do. You'd have names, addresses, well, not names, but sort of names and positions and spouses' names and children, sort of flashcards, like little baseball cards of all the employees, or as many as realistically somebody could memorize and know by heart, so that everybody knows who everybody is and is up to speed and understands what the email flow is and who's giving somebody a praising statement and so forth. You have to give vocabulary for the company, because everybody has their own sort of power speak language. If you're driving along in a van to a business hotel with flight attendants, you can't understand what they're talking about. They're all talking in code about where their next gig is going to be and how they bid for this and that and so forth. So all companies are the same. So if we teach basic vocabulary and give some organizing formats, then as we walk around the company and hear all this business speak, we know what it means, or we can interpret, or we can figure it out and absorb a lot more learning that's going on. ABCs of finance, capitalism, and so forth. Key one, though, is mastery. We have to learn the ABCs of mastery also. Here's some additional guidelines. What we want to do is try to achieve educational breadth, depth, and purity for both old and new employees. A lot of times companies will buy a division and these people don't know the culture of the acquiring company, or will grow fast, will promote people from within, and the storytelling of this is how a company runs, this is what we believe in, gets broken, or the message gets diluted or adulterated. So to make sure everybody has got a pure, clear, compelling understanding of what we're trying to do and how we do it and why we do it and so forth, you need these kinds of systematic training programs. What you might do after you sort of slap together an initial prototype for the orientation program is actually take some new prospective person, even a part-timer, and run them through it and see how they do. Realize also that as you create an orientation program, it's alive. You have to continue to add things to it, upgrade it, because the culture continues to change, and you can continue to tweak it and make it better. Here's some key summary points. I'm saying we need a blend of support systems that are going to help us become what we want to be. Some of these systems are very hard number oriented. Service metrics and financial numbers tend to be hard numbers. You're either doing it or you're not. Other ones are mixed systems. For example, when it comes to are you growing and becoming a black belt 10th degree in your particular position, we can give you some hard number feedback, but there still is a lot of art that goes into doing a good job, and how do you measure and know that that's being done. All of these systems have got to be done in the spirit of we can all do it, we're all moving towards the North Star, we can all improve, as opposed to kind of gotcha and somebody's a winner and somebody's a loser. So I would say that these kinds of systems are not something to fight. You really need to embrace them. They are your friends, because they're going to help you get what you want and be what you want to be. Thanks. In this section, I'm going to talk about mastery and how we need measurable feedback to do our own personal path of mastery in whatever our occupational craft is. Maybe to get at the idea across, I don't know if any of you out there have ever played or know somebody who's played a solo sport where there's a universal scoring system. Golf comes to mind, where if you go out and you play golf on a regular basis, you have a handicap, and that lets you know where you are in the pecking order when it comes to competitive tournaments, things like that. Or if you're bowling, you've got a bowling average, etc. And that allows you, in a sense, in a sport aspect of your life, to sort of know what level of degree of excellence you are. In martial arts, they talk about different colored belts, up to black belt and their 10th degree of black belts, and I suppose if you got there, they could invent 11 type of thing, because the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. That's one of the interesting things about a path. We also could pursue black belt 10th degree in other important parts of our life, like am I a black belt 10th degree parent, or am I a black belt 10th degree performer at my occupational craft? If we don't have measurable numbers around us to let us know how we're doing versus the rest of the world, we tend to practice wishful thinking. For example, when you ask parents how good they are, I think a modest 90% of all parents think they're in the top quartile of all parents. Well, obviously 90% can't be there. Other examples of wishful thinking that we've seen in past modules are employees at Sears Roebuck thought Sears was making 45% profit as a percent of sales when it was actually 1.7. I think 90% of wholesale distributors in the IDA profit report are stunned to find out that they're making 1/6 the profit margin that the top 10 percentile guys are doing. So sometimes we need these kinds of reality checks to sort of wake us up and get us thinking about, gee, what are best practices? If people can be that good, why can't I close the gap even halfway? If I could be 2 times more profitable than I'm doing, or 3 times, that'd be great. It isn't 6, but it's still a lot better. So if we could somehow rank your job, then you could know how you fit into the bigger scheme of things and what the possibilities are. Now, I don't want anybody to panic right now. We've talked, for example, about rankings in the past, and we'll talk more in Module 5 about using ranking reports amongst people in a company, all the salespeople, all the branch managers, all the warehouse departments if you have multiple locations, as a way not to weed the losers to feed the winners or give prizes to the winners, but as a catalyst for everybody to learn and win. I think what's important is relative gains and focusing on what I call C learning. In this next slide, what happens is when you start to rank players in a given area, the best guys like being up there, but half of why they're there is pure luck, but half is skill. And so they go to work and continue to try to improve and push the boundaries of what they're doing, and maybe they improve 2, 3, 4% a year. But heck, they're already pretty good, so the improvements are tough and incremental. But people at the bottom of the chart are, whoa, they're sort of shocked, like, I didn't realize there was that much to do. And a few simple tricks can improve their productivity 20, 30% a year. That's where the big gains are, is to help the bottom 90% move up to sort of previous top 10 percentile as the leaders continue to try to, edge out, new frontier at the high end. Now, when it comes, and incidentally, I find from a motivational viewpoint, if you take somebody who is making huge progress off a low base and is an overachiever, when you look at who they are and how their mind works and their natural gifts, that they're really doing the best they can with what they have, that to me is intrinsically more motivating than if you saw somebody who's a drop-dead natural who's just kind of coasting along and perhaps even being an underachiever for their natural ability. The second concept in the slide, though, is what I call A, B, and C learning. A learning is what you do at school. It's memorize and regurgitate. It's kind of factual, technical expertise. B learning is collaborative kinds of stuff. We all work in groups. We have processes that cut across our departments. There is chaos that we're doing. Surges come through. How do we deal with those creatively, flexibly, those kind of interpersonal team skills that help teams go? That's B learning. And C learning is the creative edge of what I call mastery. It's learning how to learn. And we're going to take a close look at that in this particular module. When you think of mastery, maybe from the media you come up with different images. I'm sure many of you saw The Karate Kid, where the kid sort of goes to Mr. Iwagi or whatever his name is and says, hey, take me on, and he says, chop wood, carry water. But in this case, it's, simonize my car and do something else, and you're not realizing that those motions are what you need to be a good karate guy. But he also wants to see how dedicated the kid is, because, who wants to waste time on a hack or a dilettante? You've seen Yoda in Star Wars, and you start to realize that these Zen masters, they're not working hard. They're working perfectly smart and totally in alignment and harmony with what's going on around them. And that's the key here. We're not talking about working harder for a few pennies more. We're talking about working smarter and in total alignment so that we can all make big bucks on a sustainable basis. Now, to do true mastery, it often takes years. And and to graph it, it's not what you think. Let's look at some graphs here. A lot of people say, all right, I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to work hard and get rich quick, and I'm going to enjoy the good life forever after. So if you graphed it over a period of time, you see them working steadily harder. The ascent is a smooth 45-degree angle. You get to where you have $100,000 in the bank, and that's good life forever. Well, there are a couple problems with this. First of all, progress doesn't happen on a smooth upward curve, as we'll see. Secondly, when you get to what you think is a good life, you realize, oh my gosh, that was an immature perception of what's good. Because as we move further down the path, we can see even further down the path, and we realize the path always goes on, and other things become important. Another approach would be, all right, we're at one level, so let's throw in incentives in there and see what happens. And this is the bribe pattern, the New Year's Eve resolution pattern. It's called the star pattern because you give first graders a star in their paper if they get it in on time and 100% correct. You get a sharp pop in performance for about 2 weeks. The refrigerator's covered with papers with stars on it. And then the kid starts to relax and really go back to their natural state of being, homostasis. So their performance falls. They now feel bad because it's falling. They have a hangover effect. It's actually going to a trough before they get back up to where they were before. So bribes are kind of quick fixes that don't have sustainable results. There's a plateau frustration. Usually when you start trying to do something, it's initially frustrating, but then you kind of get it, and you're sort of doing it. That's that little uptick, and you hit sort of a new sort of peak, but then you find that as you sort of do it, you kind of fade a little bit, and you hit a plateau. Hey, wait a minute. Where's the progress? I want that straight 45-degree angle, and that's when you say, you know what, let's redouble our efforts. And when you do that in sports, you try to train twice as often, twice as long, you harm your body. And then you get an injury, and you're knocked out of the sport for 2 weeks, 2 months. In an organization, you push your people too hard, too consistently, they quit. They literally walk out the door, and you go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? So that actually is very unproductive. That's an obsessive-compulsive pattern that doesn't really work with how we learn. So right away you see with these graphs I'm doing some myth busting. I'm saying these messages of succeed fast, that's not the way the real world works. To say work hard to get X and material goods, that'll be happiness and a good life forever after, that's not the way it works. Incentive plans can be a good catalyst, but they don't give sustainable results. Plateaus are not a problem to fix. Don't redouble your efforts and break the system. Rather, that's where the learning goes on. And so we have to learn to relax, embrace them, and do good learning. And then we'll eventually get a new integration. And the last message is that don't expect to have continuous improvement, a little flat plateau, another big improvement, a little plateau. They're long plateaus, little integrations. So really, the chart looks more like this. You get a little integration, then you have a long plateau. You spend 80% of your time on the plateaus. But on the plateaus is where the learning is going on because you're trying a lot of experiments. You're sort of falling on your face, falling forward. Turns out you may need to get 3, 4, 5, 6 things right to sort of take the next step up. And it takes a while to get them all just right. Then you integrate them and you get a little pop. And you move to the next plateau. Because the further you go along, the more you can see down the path, you start to realize this is infinite. The path can go on forever. There are no dead ends. There are no dead-end jobs. They're just dead-end people that don't have imagination, would be my contention. And really, this is life, and nobody has anybody differently, so there's the path, and then you die. Now, to move along the path at an optimal, enjoyable pace, there are certain philosophies and tools that would be helpful. From a motivational source, it does help to have a vision down the road that's pulling you towards it. That's greed. It also helps to have little spears at your back where if you don't keep going, little spears sort of prod you, so that's sort of fear or crisis that pushes you along. But beyond that, you could use the 4 languages of commitment. You could use team, collective discipline and motivation benefits, praising statements. I've talked about the 6 systems that ask us to continually improve in a balanced way. These are all important, and you can see that there are modules that are yet to come that will touch on these topics. So I'd like to conclude with a few summary points here. First of all, we need measurable reality numbers to wake us up and be realistic about who we really are. Otherwise, in a vacuum, we all think we're scratch golfers when in fact our handicap is 18 or 20 or something. Secondly, we have to be conscious of and get better at what I call B and C learning. B is interpersonal learning, and C is learning how to learn, the mastery path. On mastery, it's probably the only sustainably motivational force/system I can think of, because it becomes its own life, and your soul and your value system are sort of intertwined with it. So you start to realize that life for all people is really about different mastery paths, and that's it in a sense. Mastery is vital for high-performance distribution economics, and mastery is what's going to turn a job into a career. Thanks. This module is about gathering comparative numbers amongst groups of employees at the company. Obviously, chains have a bigger opportunity when they compare branches versus branches, and certainly if you have enough salespeople, you start to have enough of a sampling to have some sort of comparison ranking by whatever dimensions of the job you want to choose. In the past, I've talked about what I call internal benchmarking or job scorecards, and I'm trying to do it in an enlightened way, so I thought a special module just on job scorecards and for two particular case studies, branch managers and outside salespeople, might be instructive to get across the most enlightened, least threatening kind of way. Now, when we talk about comparisons, it's kind of a two-edged sword, and I rounded up two different quotes to get across each side of this issue. One quote is, "Comparisons are odious," and I didn't even know, I knew the quote, I didn't know who said it. Turns out a fellow named John Fortescue, which was sort of the original Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in England back in the 1300s. He's kind of the King's Judge, and he was the first great legal historian for England, and English law is what the United States substantially inherited back at the time of the Constitution. And one of the reasons comparisons are odious is, it's tough to come up with fair comparisons. I don't know if you've ever seen those surveys in Fortune or Forbes magazine about the most livable cities in America or the best cities for business. And a lot of these surveys will take 150 different factors like weather and housing affordability, and they'll put equal weighting on all 150. Well, some people think it's really important to have professional baseball teams, and other people don't. So there's not going to be any agreement on these surveys because everybody's going to weight all the different factors much differently than others. So it's a subjective issue as much as anything. Secondly, social systems, and your company is a social system, are give and take systems. There are days where you're helping other people out and you expect someday they're going to help you out. But when you start to put numbers everywhere and only pay people on the numbers or focus on certain numbers, people over-obsess on those things, and the generosity of spirit goes out of the system because, I don't get measured, I don't get paid for that, that's not my job kind of stuff comes back. So if you want maximum flexibility and cooperation, you don't want to come down too hard on, a few measurement number rankings of the whole story. Certainly we know that in family dynamics, when you look at how hard parents work to raise children, and then what do children do to take care of their parents when they get old, or grandparents even still do for their grandchildren, there's intergenerational giving and taking, earning and returning kind of stuff that goes on. Another reason they're odious is half of the results are pure good luck or bad luck. So to a certain degree, we're creating false bums and heroes in ranking reports. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have the Olympic motto, Latin, Citius, Aldius, Fortius, faster, higher, braver. Also, the idea that in business, if you don't keep innovating, you're going to die because everybody's going to knock off what you have, they're going to innovate, and they're going to beat you type of thing. So we do have this tough love economic reality bottom line that we do have to serve. If we do not create high-performance economics for all stakeholder groups, we can't attract and keep the best players in each of those groups that are key to keeping us going and surviving. So the trick is, how do we take both parts and put it together and kind of come up with sort of a compassionate third way? In other words, it's not going to be either this way or that way, but we're going to figure out how to use both in a constructive third way. So instead of having ranking reports and prizes going to the winners and pink slips going to the losers, we're going to, everyone learns in their own way at their own pace, just as long as there is progress, and realizing it takes all kinds of minds to go into all kinds of different jobs to get the job done at our company. Now what you'll find is that if you do have high performance and you do have expectations everywhere, there are some people who clearly aren't going to make progress on a mastery basis. And over time, they'll be so uncomfortable and drummed out, not just by the numbers, but by peer pressure, where it's a much more balanced, heartfelt, view. The buddy, you're not pulling your fair share. A lot of times those people self-weed. If in the event that they don't, clearly, there has to be a system for dealing with that, because it's not fair to everybody else to carry along people who just ultimately can't fit into the environment. But that sort of is another day and out of the scope of this particular module. So let's look at some case studies for, or guidelines for and case studies for scorecards. As far as guidelines, pick a job and try to surround it with maybe 4 to 8 numbers that sort of surround the job. Some universals are what comes out of the job, what's the output per hour, per day kind of thing. Another dimension is timeliness. Is it coming out on time, or is there chronic delays? How accurate is it? How flexible are the people in the job box that are doing what they're doing? If there is a problem, it doesn't come out on time or it's not accurate, how good are they at doing their own heroic recoveries for whoever is next in line? And then a very subjective score, which is just on a scale from 1 to 10, how effective are they, or how much are they on the team? We saw this back in section 3 with the idea of surveying employees on a scale from 1 to 10, just their morale. How pumped up are they? It's one decision point where it's half rational, it's half emotional, but what it is what it is. Same with their effectiveness score of their manager. Half of it's rational, half of it's irrational, but it's a decision point, and if you get enough votes, a consensus starts to give you something that has real value and meaning. In theory, you could take these different factors and say, well, like the weather and pro football teams for quality of life in different cities, they're not all equal. How should we weight them? I wouldn't get caught up on that right now. I just think the key is to, we just want to surround the job, to get our brains thinking about, hey, how do we push the limits and get better in lots of ways at a given job. So you find that when it comes to designing scorecards, there is no final answer. I would do something, a sort of 20/80 job, with everybody involved, get some buy-in, and then evolve it from there. I would watch over time for creeping clutter. I was doing database scorecards at one point for a group of buyers, and before I knew it, they had about 16 different measurements. And there were some processes where I said, look, you're measuring 3 points along the process. Why don't you just measure one thing at the end of the process? I realize it isn't perfect, and looking at these different things gives you a little bit more refinement, but it's a cost-benefit thing. It's just getting too cluttered. Remember also that this is not, the spirit of this is not about playing gotcha, but instead it's an improvement catalyst. Now this does raise a question of capability, because you're going to need a spreadsheet capability and you need to share it in a broad sort of way. I'll let you figure that out. If we jump right to scoring branches on this particular slide, besides the obvious big metrics financially speaking, as far as RONA, return on net assets, where you take operating income and divide it by the average investment inventory and receivables, which are big byproduct numbers. And there are lots of little programs that actually would make those numbers seem to get better. And we've talked about a lot of those productivity plays in past sessions. These are some of the atypical kinds of things that my high-performance service recipe is recommending. Remember earlier we talked about branch managers' employee rating and employee morale trends, because that was the key to the whole service retention model. If we start measuring the big 5, 6, 7 of service excellence, depending on what the exact recipe is for your number 1, number 2 niche customers, you can start to see how branches are doing across the board on fill rates, error rates, cycle count accuracy, same-day shipping, how many days in a row kind of stuff. So there are these kinds of issues that heretofore I don't think a lot of people have tried to get their arms around, but I think they're worth it. What's interesting is as you look at these scorecards, if at the same time you are doing an effective transformational turnaround, you're going from top-down financial incrementalism with mediocre results to my whole high-performance distribution concept, what you'll find is by focusing on the right customers, measuring, achieving, selling, getting paid for basic service brilliance, tuned to those customers, getting above critical mass economics and dominating a niche, you're going to find everybody's numbers take off. In other words, people are along for the ride. I remember we had a marvelous transformation at one turnaround I was involved in. And a salesperson actually had the gall to tell me, he said, a year and a half ago when you showed up, I didn't really believe any of this stuff, but I got to hand it to you. He said, I am working less than I ever have, and my volume is up 35%. All my employees all my customers just rave about the great service they're getting. All the fires I used to put out are disappearing. Life is good. In other words, what he was saying is, I'm a jockey and I'm riding a horse. Before it used to be a glue factory nag, it's transformed to secretariat. All I've got to do is hold on and I'm winning big. So a lot of times we come up with these scorecards and we're assuming that the branch managers or the salespeople or whoever's involved can actually do a lot about these. They can't. If you look at warehouse productivity numbers, if you have good months, their productivity numbers are high. If you have off months as far as sales, their productivity numbers will be down. It's just that simple. So you have to realize that they're very powerful profit-causing productivity improvement currents and plays that make all numbers look better. Even still, within an area, you can look at relative improvements up and down. So let's look at sales reps and a scorecard we could come up with it for them. There are a number of dimensions of selling. For example, one dimension of selling is maintaining business we have. So if you ranked all of your salespeople from high to low by just the gross margin dollars they have in their territory, that's an important thing because obviously the guy with the biggest territory is generating the most contribution dollars that pays for everybody else's, paychecks and so forth. But you'll find if somebody has a huge maintenance territory, maybe we've taken a great farmer, somebody who couldn't do great cold calling, but we've taken them in and reassigned all the biggest house accounts to whom we team sell like crazy. So lots of our people know their people. Maybe we could even send a chimpanzee in a company sweatshirt, but and we keep the business, but we don't want to take the risk. We have a very good maintainer. Well, that guy is going to be number one on this particular dimension every month. But if the next ranking report said, okay, let's look at this year's margin dollars versus last year, they could be way at the bottom of the list because if they have all of the business from very large, mature account to basically grow with their industry or grow with the economy, you may not see much year-to-year improvement. Whereas somebody who has a lot of target accounts and is getting fresh new business out of them could have remarkable year-to-year gains. A third dimension is, can we go out there and sell bigger orders on a systematic basis, get last look of the premium? Those salespeople have very high what we call profit factors, where we take the average order size, gross margin dollar per transaction, multiplied by the average margin percent for the whole territory to come up with some number. And the person at the top of the report is getting bigger orders at better margin percents relative to the guy at the bottom of the report. Other dimensions, 4 and 5, would be receivables management. What's the days outstanding for a sales territory? What are the write-offs for that sales territory for the last 6, 12, 18, 24 months? How well are they working with, not against, the credit manager to be sort of the early warning system, the eyes and the ears for the credit manager to be the good cop, whereas the credit manager is the bad cop. We could look at, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much are the salespeople on the team, and let everybody on the inside that would have a view on this, an opinion, score them anonymously. We do that twice a year, and on the alternate quarters, twice a year, we could ask top 50 customers or whoever the salesman called on, here's a quick little report card, fill it in anonymously, send it back to our account, and we'll use it in a constructive way, and start to compile customer ratings. All these things can be put together, and we can start to see patterns that are emerging and see who are best at some dimensions, and other people can realize how much upside there is. And the best guys, again, help to teach, coach, motivate the guys who could move up the most at the bottom. Now, a lot of people say, Bruce, who's got the time and the money? This is just an extra cost in addition, and you're right. But basically, if you believe in mastery economics and mastery return on investment, then you say this is a small price to pay for seeing the bottom 90% move up to the top 10 percentile, and the top 10 percentile keep finding new creative ground to improve productivity numbers 2, 3, 4, 5% a year. You might say, well, wait a minute, why aren't you giving more acclaim to number 1 and 2? And I'm saying, well, I think they're false heroes in a lot of cases, and The truth of the matter is, if 1 and 2 work with 10 and 12 guys at the bottom, the whole ecosystem is going to get the fastest relative improvement than if number 1 and 2 look at their own navel and try to get 3% better a year. I think they're going to do that anyway, but I'd rather see the bottom 90 have huge year-to-year gains and improvements. That's going to be the best for everybody. Because again, in the long run, nobody can outperform the quality of the whole ecosystem. In the short term, we can all think about ourselves, but we're in a box. We're not high performers, and we'll never get there if we think about ourselves that way. Key summary points. Any job scorecard should be used in that third way to help everybody grow and learn, not prizes and pink slips. Each group should co-create their own quick and dirty just to get going for fairness, sense of purpose, practicality, and get their interest going. And then as we look at these things, we have to subtract out the luck as well as look for the collective wisdom and motivation we can find and help the bottom 50, 60, 70% move up big and help the top 5, 10% incrementally move along. Thanks. Turning the boss-subordinate relationship into we're all adult partners, that was the 6th boundary system, if you recall, in my boundary system module a few ones back. And it's a theme that I've touched on before in other parts of the video series. Back in section 2, we first came across the idea of a new employment contract and maximum delegation to rank and file frontliners. We talked about tough love of the financial free market capitalistic system. At the end of section 3, we talked about employees having the power, if you will, to evaluate anonymously the bosses, which bosses don't like at first. And I went through a case study on that. We talked about empowerment in section 4, where things are happening that, for good or bad, before the boss even finds out about it, and good or bad, the boss is pleased, kind of thing. So let's see if we can add to what we've had so far with some new perspectives on this. Here's kind of a new classic picture. On the left-hand side, you see the traditional power pyramid. The king is at the top, surrounded by a bunch of back pocket kissers who are sucking up and acting important and so forth. And meanwhile, the serfs are out there doing all the work. But really, historically, the customers were kind of at the bottom, and this is still the way it is with monopolistic, government services, for example. And the new thing starting in the early 90s was to put the customer at the top of the pyramid, and since the frontliners were the people who were going to make or break us on service excellence, quality, flexibility, whatever, they would have to come next. And now the top part of the pyramid became the bottom, and servant leadership or terms like that were coined. Well, it's a nice idea, but it obviously, takes a while to happen, if at all. And if you look at all the money that's been spent on leadership programs and service management quality programs to no avail in 95% of the cases, obviously we're still missing stuff. We need new perspectives to sort of crack this nut, this problem. So I thought what we might do is to say, you and I really play all roles. We're bosses in some situations, because if we have children, we're sort of the boss in charge. Sometimes we're staff people when it comes to committees involving in the community activities we may do. Certainly there are times where we are buying from suppliers in our personal lives. Sometimes we are supplying stuff to people as though we're the supplier, and there's a customer that happens to the next person in line in our process we may be involved in. So it's not that hard for us to really be very empathetic. So I thought I would start off with one empathetic view, which is, how many of you out there have children, particularly ones that are sort of 13 to 20 plus, who are still totally dependent, on the family from an income, viewpoint? And you have to think, well, how much responsibility do the children really have? Can they actually put their dirty clothes in the hamper, let alone do their own wash and other chores on a consistent basis around the house? How much of an entitlement attitude do they have as far as what they should get, and always kind of whining, pushing the boundaries, and then you slap them back and they come back creatively and try to push some more, always sort of say, well, yeah, but if you love me, you'd give it to me, type of thing. And if you ask both parties, on off the record, how do they feel, you might see something like this. The parent, or in many cases the boss in a company, would say, I'm overburdened. I'm running around trying to work my tail feathers off, for a lousy return on investment in this business. And frankly, I'm underappreciated and I'm broke. And that's the same way a lot of parents feel. They're broke and their kids want to go to these fancy colleges. They're thinking, how are we going to afford this type of thing? If you go to the kid or the subordinate, they're saying, well, I feel oppressed. I mean, the boss knows everything. They tell me what's going on. I don't do anything unless they tell me what to do, kind of thing. Otherwise, I just kind of try to get away with whatever I can. And to a certain degree, I agree, I'm painfully comfortable. In other words, I don't have to worry about anything. I'm not really into working that hard or taking a lot of responsibility around here. But I am a bit of a prisoner. And there's a sense of solidarity with me and the other teenagers down at school. We take turns complaining about our parents and who has the biggest story that's going to win the prize for the Dumb Dad Award this week down at school. So you see that kind of it's a dance. It takes two to play this. And you have to think, well, what is each person getting out of it? Obviously in families, it's biological imperative that we wind up having kids. The DNA just wants to survive. But if you think about it in business, there's some people who say, I want to become a manager because managers have more power, they have more control, they have more income, they have more esteem. But to get there, I have to learn a lot, know a lot, and so forth. And so I need to be known as an expert all the way to getting to be a boss. And they get to be a boss, and they start to feel overburdened, and the numbers aren't there, and they're thinking, well, what am I going to do here? And when I talk to a lot of managers, it's common to commiserate with each other. We whine about how tough it is to find and keep employees and what people expect these days and so forth. Misery loves company. And so it's the language of complaint as opposed to hidden commitment, the language of blame as opposed to personal responsibility. On the flip side, you go ask employees, well, what do you want? And they say, well, the truth of the matter is don't ask me to be more responsible. I don't want to take risks and fail because that gives me grave concern that I might not keep getting my paycheck. I'm just into total security. I realize it has its price. I mean, I've got to suck up. But if I suck up, show up, shut up, do what I'm told, play politics, it all works out. I'm painfully comfortable. Now, we could add some other sort of wants in there, but one of them seems to be to complain, because people complain again, but they don't ever get past the complaining stage, to using our 4 new languages, if you will, to moving on to some new higher level. So it takes two, and it's human nature. I mean, I'm not saying this is good or bad. It just is. Let's take another empathetic view. The Emperor's Clothes. You all know the story by Hans Christian Andersen. And nobody wants to tell the boss he's running around without any clothes on because he'll get angry. He'll shoot the messenger that brings bad news. Well, at home, we say to our kid, hey, son, how's it going? Just fine, Dad. Really? Oh, yeah, sure. And the kid's thinking, better not tell my dad that I, scratched the car, or I've just flunked this test, or, I did something dumb, I broke whatever, because if I do, I'm going to get an immediate hammer job lecture, and, that's going to be so painful. I'd rather lie for a while until he discovers it, because maybe pain in the future is not equal to pain right now. They don't really think about, is it greater pain in the future? What's the discounted cash flow net present pain value? They just think, avoid pain in the moment at all costs. And to a certain degree, this happens in business. Hey, on a scale from 1 to 10, Louis, how you doing? Oh, I'm a 10, boss. I'm a 10. And the guy's thinking, I hate this job, and I hate you too. But, you're going to tell the boss what he wants to hear. So what's the antidote to the emperor's clothing? In theory, we could say, well, as parents or managers, we shouldn't be so insecure. If the kid criticizes us, it's okay. We're not perfect. And say, well, that's fine. I mean, what can we do about it? Let's use that as turn negatives into positives. Let's grow and go from it. Easier said than done. We could say we're not going to shoot messengers of bad news. In fact, why not, when somebody gives you bad news, say, thank you for telling me and sharing with it. That is really great. I applaud your honesty and so forth, and we do that really nice upfront thing, and then we hammer the guy, as opposed to saying, well, bad stuff happens. How do we turn negatives into positives? What's the lesson here? Was it a good mistake or a bad mistake? Even if it was a bad mistake, it's a good mistake, because next time we'll know how to make a good mistake. Again, this is so intellectually easier to do than to emotionally do it in the moment. And sometimes you think, well, instead of waiting for bad news to come to my office, maybe I should go out, managing my wandering around, and find bad news in the bud and nip it there. In fact, Maybe I'll go out and while I'm doing that, systematically look for good news and publish it like crazy, and maybe that will start to shift the tide and the attitude and the morale of the company. That's what publishing praising statements was all about, Module 5.2. Or what if we rethought the business so that most of the things we did were good mistakes because the tide, the strategic strategies, assumptions, and plays were all consistent with what the real marketplace is doing and wants, so that everything seems to be working because the wind is at our back. So that's maybe the highest order of effectiveness we could do. Not to mention we should do all these things. But let's look at a slide as far as a reality test. If we said on the left we have hired hands showing up, checking their brain at the door, complaining about it, but actually kind of liking it. It's a painful, comfortable situation. Over to the right hand, hey, we're all partners here. We're all adults. On the left, how much do we suck up to our boss at this company as opposed to, hey, the boss is incidental. I've got my job. I know what I've got to do to make the numbers happen, to grow the business. I understand the total big picture. I'm earning premium productivity, supported premium wages, etc. I don't need to sort of be jerked around with short-term sticks and carrots. I'm in it for the long run, and I'm guided by the North Stars. So if you ask people to score this thing, I think in spite of all of the talk, the lip service, we're still down in the old 1-2 area, and we have to figure out how to get untracked and move towards 4 and 5. So to stop the dumb dance that we're doing, because it takes 2 to play this game, it's not going to be easy or quick. And to a certain degree, it's not good or bad. It's just part of the human scene, and we're going to try to grow out of it. Clearly, bigger chains that have more bureaucracy have greater problems than a single standalone location where owner-operator has got 30, 40, 50 employees and can have a lot of control over changing that environment much more quickly than a big chain. And clearly, we're going to need systems to help us become what we want to be. Here's some summary suggestions. I think a lot of solving a problem is just defining what the real problem is and discussing it and putting it out there as an object and not making it a subjective personal issue. And saying, it's not bad, it's just human. Go back and use my 4 languages of change, going from complaining to commitment, going from blame to personal responsibility, going from New Year's resolutions to competing commitments in dynamic equilibrium, and then look for the assumptions that hold us that are flawed to the assumptions that we hold that make more sense. Watch out reverse delegation. Just kind of keep saying, what's the objective? What are the North Stars? Figure it out. Point out that wages are not entitlements anymore, but rather they're governed by labor markets and high-value productivity per employee. You possibly could come up with, if you were a boss, say, look, if I blow my stack, if I shoot a messenger brings back good news, all you have to do is, hold up this thing and I owe you $50 right on the spot. In other words, write up some sort of contract and say, I'm not saying that reflexively I'm not going to shoot people, but if you point out that I shot people, I'm going to pay you $50 right on the spot. Some penalty that makes it a game and gives the person remuneration because you say, oh, I'm sorry, they're going to think next time he's going to shoot me, and they're going to suck up. When it comes to praising statements, a double benefit comes from when you can give a praising statement for a good mistake, and I'll go into good mistakes in a subsequent module. If you have line people who you're afraid might be shooting messengers or bring bad news, you can offer an open door due process. In other words, if an employee has a problem with their boss, they can go anytime they want and ask for an open door audience with the boss's boss. And there are a lot of companies that do that, so there's a sort of a judicial hierarchy system. Keep doing the anonymous evaluations of managers, that's huge. And then scorecard numbers surrounding bosses starts to put peer pressure on everybody also. So this is a kind of problem that's not going to change overnight. It'll sort of melt away gradually over time. And there may be some self-weeding where people just say, I just can't do it. I am such a dependent employee, or I'm such an autocratic boss, I've got to go someplace else where I can continue to play the same old game. Thanks. In this module, we're going to talk about when you come up to unforeseen problems, what do you do to solve them? Because Bruce isn't here, and it wasn't on his tape that we heard, and you're going to need it, because I'm suggesting a lot of stuff, but it's big picture stuff, it's general guidelines. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, in a lot of cases, the rubber doesn't seem to meet the road. There seems to be a gap. if you've thought about it, there may be three kinds of problems and three kinds of solutions. There are known problems with known solutions. There are going to be known problems you're going to have with unknown solutions, but you think you can figure it out because you've got some pretty good guidelines. And there are surprises. Unforeseen problems, so we can't know the solutions for those at all. So when that happens, you're going to be on your own. You can sort of remember Bruce's North Stars, you can remember some of his guidelines, but you're going to have to, as a group, individually, collectively, be able to push the wheel of learning. So let's look at what the wheel of learning looks like. It starts off with number one, the top of the clock there, where we ask questions. And we can ask them out of two ways. We can ask them reactively, like, oh, I just got fired. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I wonder what the deal was. In other words, we're asking questions because of a crisis. Or we could ask proactively, we could say, oh, here's the first job scorecard. I see I'm standing all alone at number 6 out of 8 salespeople, or number 4 out of 6 branch managers. How does number 1 get all the results that number 1 is getting? So I'm proactively asking a curious question. I want to figure out how to get better. Then the next step is we go and we look around and we start to come up with ideas or theories for, oh, I think I'm here where I am because of certain things and da-da-da-da. And out of our theories come experiments, because we really don't know what the final answer is until we get in there and try something. So hopefully we design good experiments, because we can design bad experiments, and we go ahead and we do the test. Once we do the test, we get to a reflection point where we say, well, how did it go? And a lot of times these things don't work out the way we thought, so we go, oh, there's new stuff that came up. There was unforeseen things. And so this raises new questions, which puts us back to the top of the circle, and around we go. Sometimes we try an experiment and it kind of works. And say, wait a minute, there's something here. Let me figure out what it is. And we really push the same wheel, but we're doing it in a fine-tuning way to help get an integration or closure or some solid gains in some sort of way. So that's the wheel of learning. Now, pushing this puppy is a full-time job, and it's very hard, particularly in a collective environment, because at every step there are resistances that come from one or more people. Each step requires different skills that not everybody has. There are very few people, if any, that probably are super well equipped to do all steps of the wheel equally well. For example, when it comes to asking questions, one big stop for frontliners is, well, I'm not asking any dumb questions in a meeting, because you ask dumb questions, you're not going to get, suck-up points, you're not going to get promoted. It's just bad politics. And I'm certainly not going to ask questions about why the company stinks or why policies aren't working, because, the big honcho could get upset with that. So you don't want to, question the quality of what's going on. And another reason for not asking questions is things are pretty good. We're sort of just happily in the contentment box, not realizing slowly we're dying. Right now, things seem to be good. When it comes to theories, not a lot of people necessarily are wired to see the big picture and realize that, oh, it's a total forest. Most people are wired to kind of count rocks underneath a tree, and over time realize the trees are starting up to grow, but never realizing it's a forest where the contours are changing. So a lot of theories that people come up with are actually in very small boxes within my department, within my job. This is the way I'm going to do things to save 5 minutes here or there type of thing. It's good stuff. I mean, it's efficiency. But it's nothing breakthrough kind of results that we need. When it comes to experiments, since most of them fail, a lot of people just don't like to do experiments, because most people are very gun-shy, because when you fail, somebody hits you on the head and says you're stupid and so forth. So, best just not to be a pioneer, because they get arrows in their back. Wait till somebody else does it, and if it works for sure and you have to do it, okay, then you'll imitate them, kind of thing. So there are not a lot of people that are brave, bold, frequent experimenters and can have thick hides and can take a lot of failures. And when it comes to reflection, where we think about our failures, that's painful, or other people judge our failures, that's tough too. A lot of times we reflect, there goes a lot of instant finger pointing, blame game kind of stuff, as opposed to the 4 languages that I've talked about earlier. And even there's blatant stealing of credit, because if something works out, all of a sudden everybody's all over because they had they were part of the program too. Success has many fathers. A mistake is an orphan. So to get this wheel going, sometimes you almost have to wait till a crisis occurs. Look at this next slide. 4 boxes in our head. There's contentment, there's denial. Things start getting worse, but we're in denial. Oh no, things are fine. This is just normal stuff. Everybody has this too. There are lots of ways to rationalize that things aren't getting better, and in fact things are getting worse. And it goes and goes and goes until a crisis occurs. You know, we get fired, our company gets in, big distress. We got to lay off tens of thousands of people at some big corporation. Now everybody's anxious. And out of anxiety, the possibility is there for seeds of renewal. Now there are 2 kinds of renewal. There's continuous improvement. Those are the little box, the yellow arrows on the far right, where it's like black belt, 4th degree, 5th degree, 6th degree. The rules the game are set. We're getting good feedback. We're trying to shave our handicap from 8 to 6 to 5 to 4. We kind of know what we have to do. The game is pretty laid out for us. And those are easier kinds of improvements than transformational improvements. Now, what's a transformational improvement? In this next slide, let's say our organization is a cat. It's a finely tuned cat. The cat works generally, but it's getting a bit haggard and, fur's falling out and so forth. Return on investment is only 7%. And we find out that their high performers are doing 6 times better than we are. And somebody says, you've got a cat of a company here, and it's really a great cat. It just needs to bark. You go, oh, okay, bark. Well, look, this is going to be a little bit traumatic, but surgically we're going to remove the cat's voice box, and we're going to stick in, transplant, a dog's voice box. But then you start to realize there's an alignment problem here. The dog's voice box has much bigger cords that needs a lot more air, which comes from much bigger lungs. Cats have tiny lungs, tiny rib cages. So now you need a lung transplant and a bigger rib cage to make the cords work. But then the bigger lungs need a bigger life support system, structural bones, muscle, whatever. And you start to realize, we need a dog. We need just to get rid of the cat, and we have to get a dog. Now the sad thing is, in a transformation, all the protoplasm, the elements of the cat, 99.9% could be reincorporated in the dog. And that's sort of like all the employees could have a new role in the new culture that we want to create, but everybody's going to have to reskill, relearn, rebalance jobs, get compensated in different ways, have new accountability, responsibility, and that's so traumatic that most people don't even want to begin it. They just want to hang on to the cat situation until total chaos, crisis forces them to do something, and then a lot of companies don't survive. So we're trying to do the transformation gracefully and as easy and as painlessly as possible, but it still is a tough road. This video, a lot of these ideas I'm talking about are transformational, and they're kind of revolutionary. When I say let's improve our return on investment 5 to 6-fold, let's grow wages another 20 to 50%, let's grow 2 to 5 times faster than the industry, these aren't incremental improvements. These are huge improvements. And I'm offering a lot of theories as far as how to get what's in it for me economic engagement, how to wire the heart, mind, and wallet of all the frontliners into this new transformational vision that I've been laying out. As far as experiments, there are going to be a lot of them. And I'm giving you guidelines, but you're still going to have to push the wheel of learning and make a lot of good mistakes to get there. And your chaos path is going to look like this following slide. It isn't going to be where here's the old world, here's the cat, we're going to make a few adjustments and we're going to magically move to the new thing. Instead, we're going to start with the old status quo, we're going to watch Bruce TV, we're going to start doing a few things, all hell's going to break loose, just kidding, but it's going to be more traumatic, on a grind than maybe you thought. But because we know where the North Stars are, and because we have tools like the Wheel of Learning, and we understand what good mistakes are, and the rules of 5 to 7, we're going to hang in there. And we may scratch ourselves and go through brambles and up wrong mountain paths and so forth, but if we keep our eyes on that North Star, we're going to eventually get to a new higher level way of competing and prospering, and all of our stakeholders are going to win. So key points to take home on this are all the employees are not going to buy into all this stuff in the same way, at the same rate. Old habits and systems are going to die hard. None of us typically that are watching out there, Viewerland, are professional turnaround folks and can do this, out of their back pocket. So we have to keep repeating our assumptions, reaffirming our faith in our North Stars. We have to use our tools like the wheel of learning and good mistakes that'll come, etc. We have to keep falling forward on our face, or like rapids, we're going to have to sort of keep looking for the rocks, taking some hits, getting a little bit wet, but not letting the boat sink. And eventually we'll get through this period to new, calmer, better waters. Or one last analogy, if you're an old clunker car, they can go 50 miles an hour, but you're on a very narrow, super dark, winding country road where the forest comes right up to the edge and your headlights are pathetic. You have to go slower. You may have to go at 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour. But as long as you go slow enough that your headlights will work, and you twist and you turn, but you're on the right road, eventually you're going to get there. So again, it has to do with kind of a little bit of patience, a little bit of faith, having a couple tools that help you along the path between the old and the new. Thank you.